Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Colonel Mazon, for the introduction. We'd like to talk a little bit this morning about maritime strategy in Africa. Maritime security should be a concern for us all. Why is that? Look at the map. In fact, I should have just one slide, this slide, to tell the whole story, and I'll go sit down. When you look at this map, what do you see? The map of Africa. But most of you, when you look at the map of Africa, what comes to mind is, first of all, how large it is, how diverse it is, and also probably all the superimpositions of maps that we tend to put together. We basically fit half of the world in there, the United States and China and some of the other countries. But I bet you that most of you are ignoring the blue around Africa. Right? Most of you are ignoring the blue around Africa. But it is the blue around Africa that also makes Africa very important. Because when you look at Africa, what you really see is a big island, isn't it? You know, this is what you see, is a big island. So Africa is a big island. It's surrounded basically by water. When you look at the African continent, you'll see that most African countries are coastal states. Most African countries are coastal states. There's only a minority of countries. There's only a few countries that are, quote unquote, landlocked. Right? So when we think about Africa, when we think about Africa's security, when we think about Africa's development, we need to keep that in mind. We need to keep that in mind. So if you're an islander, and if you ignore the waters that surround your island, well, you probably will be making all sorts of strategic mistakes. And by and large, this is what has happened in Africa over the last 50 years or so. African leaders have ignored this very important dimension of their condition. African leaders, therefore, have not factored in the maritime dimension in how they approach issues of security and issues of development in Africa. And this has had important consequences. The land-centric approach to security has meant that a whole portion of African territory has been ignored. A whole dimension of security has been ignored. Also importantly, resources critical to development are not being properly supervised. So this is very, very important for us to keep in mind. Africa's security and Africa's development very much depend on how we approach the waters that surround Africa. Fish is so central to African, never mind culture, never mind economics. It's central to Africa's culture. Just imagine what will happen to many of your societies if there's no fish. We're going to talk about this in greater detail in a few minutes. So what I wanted to do today is to go beyond these contextual points and talk about some of the threats and some of the challenges that confront Africa in the area of maritime domain, to make the point that we all need both to pay attention to these issues and to incorporate the maritime dimension in how we think strategically about Africa. When we look at the continent and look at the threats, the maritime threats facing it, a handful of them come to the surface. At the very top is fishing, IUU fishing, which is illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. Human smuggling, the smuggling of other illicit goods, piracy, and port crime. These are some of the big threats and challenges confronting Africa today. I'd like to spend a few minutes looking at them in some detail. Of course, given the constraints of time we have, my presentation will be cursory. Hopefully we'll have time at the end of the presentation to engage in some conversations about these issues. Fishing, IUU fishing. Well, the point to be made here is that because Africans, by and large, do not control their waters, much of their fish is being stolen. It's as simple as that. The amount of fish that's being stolen, no one really knows exactly. No one really knows exactly. All we know is that at least a very conservative estimate is that about $1 billion worth of fish per year is being stolen out of Africa. Now, there has been some rethinking about those data, and this particular graph here from the Pew Research indicates that there has been a considerable underestimation of the amount of fish that's being stolen from Africa. West Africa is really the epicenter of this crisis. Now, let me just tell you a story to illustrate how devastating this is, and it's a personal story. As you know, I travel extensively around the continent to work on maritime security. So I spent some time in Senegal. So in Senegal, and I have many friends in African Navy. So this Navy captain, Senegalese Navy captain, takes me to the beach to buy some fish. It's the weekend. You know, he wanted to entertain me with some fish and so on. I said, well, great, let's do it. So we go to the beach and look for the fish. And the fisherman had no fish. So then comes a fisherman who tells the Navy captain that the fish had not arrived yet. And the Navy captain was asking him, what do you mean the fish has not arrived? And he said, then he explained to the captain that the fisherman had not gone to the boat. The fisherman had to go to the boat and buy the fish and then bring to the beach and basically imported fish, right? So the boat had not arrived, so the fisherman had not gone to the boat to buy the fish, so the fish didn't come to the beach. Okay? This is Senegal. This is Senegal. There are other places around Africa that are also importing fish. And this is something that we need to keep in mind. We are in Africa importing a tremendous amount of tilapia from Asia. Okay, so But just keep in mind, what are the implications of that? What are the implications of that to security, to food security, to human security, and so on and so forth? Human smuggling is another important threat facing the African continent right now. And again, using the seas as the main highways for this trade. Millions of people are involved as victims, and this is a very lucrative business. But what I wanted to point your attention to is the maritime dimension. So you have all the routes, mainly going from the south up north, through the Mediterranean into Europe. Okay? And by the way, the drama that we are seeing today, we anticipated that years ago. There's no reason for the European countries to be surprised. There's no reason for the African countries to be surprised, because this is something that we've known for a long time. And by the way, this is not, the wave has not crested yet. The wave has not crested yet. Expect a tremendous amount of more movement from Africa to Europe. And again, this has been building up for at least a decade. I remember in 2004, I spent a year in Spain, and you could not pass a day in Spain without having headlines in the newspapers about another boat that had sunk with Africans perishing, making the cross into Europe. A related issue, trafficking in persons. Again, very big business, and the highways tend to be the oceans. Speaking of highways, narcotics, another big issue. Major threat in Africa. Drugs coming from the Americas. It used to be, I'll put a map there for you. It used to be that the drugs would go straight from the Americas into Europe. No longer the case. No longer the case. Now, most of the drugs are going through West Africa and then up to Europe. Now, there's all sorts of aspects to this, but I really wanted to focus on drugs coming from the Americas to West Africa into Europe. The old paradigm was that drugs were very much a Western problem. Again, I remember engaging with these issues with my African brothers for years now. They're telling me, Assis, what are you worried about? Africans don't do drugs. This is a European problem. You Americans, you're the ones who consume drugs. Just be careful, because this is what the producing countries in the Americas also thought. Okay, but now we see that even the producing countries are consuming a lot of the drugs. Same thing in West Africa. A lot of the drugs used to just go through, but now you see that about 10% to 15% of the drugs stay in the country, and they're being used in the countries. And they are completely corroding this society at many levels. Whether you're talking about the institutions, whether you're talking about the families, they are being corroded. And this is a very big problem. very big problem. I can tell you stories and stories about, the encounters between West African drugs. Let me tell you a story about Guinea-Bissau. Guinea-Bissau, of course, as you know, is being promoted to the first narco state in Africa. But our brothers and sisters in Guinea were not familiar with cocaine until fairly recently. There was a story of a cargo of cocaine that ran aground in Guinea-Bissau. So some of the fishermen, helped themselves to the powder, and they didn't know what it was. They had no idea what cocaine was. Some of them thought it was fertilizer, so they started sprinkling on the plants. True story. Some of them thought it was some sort of paint, so they started painting their huts with it, and until somebody tried it. So, oh, well, you can get high on this, but now, this has happened, within the last 10 years or so. Now, Guinea-Bissau is going through some very, very difficult problems because of this, to the point where the Navy from Guinea-Bissau was implicated in the trade. And the former chief of the Navy is now sitting at a New York prison because of this. Now, what is that? Piracy. When I give this talk to an American audience, you can see the American audience sitting in the chairs kind of fidgeting because they want to talk about piracy. This is a very big international concern. Not so much for Africa. Piracy, Africans see piracy toward the bottom of their priority list. Now, let me tell you, perhaps you should reconsider that. And perhaps you should bring piracy closer to the top of your preoccupations, because it's a big issue. It's a big issue. Now, go back to the map. And when you consider that Africa is surrounded by water, how Africa engages with the world will have to be through the oceans, mainly in terms of trade. Now, as you know, Africa's contributions to world trade are still very, very small. Very, very small. Africa contributes something like 3%, only 3% of global trade. But if you look at it from a pessimistic perspective, you can say, well, this is terrible. But if you look at it optimistically, you can see that Africa has a tremendous amount of growth still ahead. Africa will grow tremendously. As Africa establishes itself, as Africa imposes itself on the global trade arena, trade will have to increase, both trade between Africa and the rest of the world and intra-African trade. And you will have to use the maritime highways to accomplish that. And this is why piracy is a big problem, because piracy disrupts trade. This is really the big concern about piracy. There's the criminal aspect of it, which we should not minimize, but it's really how disruptive piracy is to global trade that is a big, big, big concern. Are you all familiar with piracy off the Horn of Africa? For much of the past, for much of the 2000s, in fact, the late 1990s into the 2000s, now has abated. I have a graph graph there for you. Piracy off the coast of Somalia has been by and large eliminated. The problem has been dealt with. But I like to say that the pirates are on holiday. They're taking a rest. Not well deserved, but they're taking a holiday anyway. They're taking a holiday because the international community acted very, very strongly off the Horn of Africa. The Europeans got involved with two operations. The United States got involved. Other countries also got involved. We really eliminated the problem off the Horn of Africa. The Somali pirates got a bit too greedy. They're sailing off to the coast of India and down to the Mozambique Channel. The international community had to act. In West Africa, however, the problem is defying solutions. The problem is defying solutions for one simple reason. It has now become an international problem. It's not an international problem. Why do I say that? It has to do with international law. It has to do with international law. And just very quickly, one of the things that you need to remember about international law pertaining to maritime is 12, 24, 200. 12 nautical miles. That delimits the territorial waters. Anything within 12 nautical miles is within the purview of the state. Anything beyond 12 nautical miles becomes an international concern. Okay? Because your territorial waters end there. That's basically your boundary. Well, there's a contiguous zone that goes the 24. The 24 is the 24, 12 national, 24 contiguous, 200 high seas. Anything that happens within the 12 nautical miles is your problem. In terms of crime, what happens within the 12 nautical miles is considered armed robbery at sea. What happens outside of the 12 nautical miles is considered piracy. Piracy is an international crime. Armed robbery at sea is a national crime. So when you have a piracy problem, the international community is obligated to act. When you have a domestic problem, in fact, the international community sovereignty issues should not intervene. In the Gulf of Guinea, most of the problems you have are armed robbery at sea related. It's almost as if the bandits have gone to law school and they stay very, very close, hugging the territorial waters. So when people say, well, how come the international community is not intervening in the Gulf of Guinea? That's the reason. That's the main reasons. There's no legal trigger that has been activated for the international community to engage. This is not to say that the problem is not big. It's a big problem. It's a very, very big problem. Armed robbers are disrupting trade in the Gulf of Guinea. I can tell you another story of a country that was facing economic collapse because the armed robbers were really asphyxiating the port for this country. They were conducting all sorts of operations just outside of the port. So the ships that needed to come into the port were not. They were bypassing the port. So the president of this country came running to Washington. He asked our own president here for help. So the United States responded, and we sent a team to that particular country. We went there, we assessed the situation, and much to the dismay of the American team, that particular country did not have a plan. Did not have a plan on how to address that issue. They had a problem, but they wanted the United States to put together a plan and implement the plan for them. We said, well, that's not the way it works. That's not the way it works. You have to put together a plan. And perhaps we can help you resource it. Perhaps we can help you implement it. And this brings me to another point, which is Tom Dempsey asked a couple of days ago, raise your hands if your country has a national security strategy. I will not ask you to raise your hand if your country has a national maritime strategy, but I strongly advise you to consider having one. Because with a national maritime strategy, you can do a very good threat assessment. Some of these threats that I'm talking about and others, you can assess the challenges that you have, institutional, structural, and otherwise. And you could also begin to put together plans, action plans to tackle them. One of the emerging threats in the Gulf of Guinea especially has to do with oil platforms. Many countries in the Gulf of Guinea are completely and utterly dependent on the production of oil. Some of us think that it's just a matter of time before some of those platforms are seen as targets by terrorists. And when that happens, when terrorists really expose those vulnerabilities, the pain that we are going to see in West Africa will be heightened tremendously. So let me conclude here then. I hope I didn't take too much of your time. I look forward to your questions so that we can perhaps look at some of these issues in greater detail. Thank you very much.